All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Jake Pippin. We're at the Nicholson Library on Linfield University campus. It's June 9th, 2021. Jake.
I do too.
Jake.
That's my own name.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
First question, biggest question, why wine?
It's endlessly fascinating. It doesn't get old, and it's fun. I mean, if I have to, there are a few jobs where you combine science and history and geology and travel and accounting and spreadsheets, which I really like spreadsheets, but and storytelling. You put all that into one, and it's wine. Like I'm sure other people say that about other industries, but this is my industry, so I certainly feel that it just is able to connect all of those dots in a way that's just never gotten old and is just kind of continually fascinating. Either looking forward or looking back, either or, and and it's it's just part of the heritage and culture here, or at least it has become that way in the last 50 years, 60 years, and to be part of that is exciting.
So take us through your kind of pre-wine life, upbringing, education. Where are you from, and where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Oregon. I grew up up the McKenzie River in a little area called Camp Creek, which is kind of just outside of Springfield, outside of Eugene. I always say I'm from Eugene because nobody knows where Camp Creek is, but every once in a while I'll meet somebody who's like, well, where up Camp Creek? And I'm like, here? And they're like, oh, cool, I grew up across the street, 20 years prior. I'm like, all right. But my family's from here. Actually, my family's from Yamhill. They grew up, my great-grandmother was born in Newburgh and grew up off of Red Hills Road over, so I've always kind of had a connection to this area. My grandmother grew up out here. My dad spent a lot of time up here, and then, they moved to Eugene, so we grew up there, and then went to Thurston High, went to the U of O, and then left. I had traveled a bit before, mostly on the West Coast, and but I'd never been on a plane till I was like, however old you are in 8th grade, and I think about it. I've never been on a plane before 9/11, so I have no idea what that is like, and but I left after college. I guess people do that. I didn't go away for college. That wasn't really an option, and I didn't really have a plan. Like, I thought I'd move to Portland. I thought I'd, come up here. But it just, everything I kept finding, I was like, I don't know if I really want to do that. Like, I needed something that just kind of was very different than what I had experienced. And so I moved to New York City. And I had gone once before and I hated it. It was miserable. And if anybody's been in New York in August, like it is miserable. It's hot, it's sweaty, it smells. It's an awful city in August. And then you go any other time of the year and you're like, oh, this is actually pretty magical. This is the bad that is just surrounded by a whole lot of good, and it has this vibrant energy that just is a very different energy than the West Coast and Oregon, and that was really appealing. In school, I started off, in college, I started off doing theater and wanting to, be a theater teacher. And I started to think about that. My dad's a teacher, my grandparents were teachers, and they're like, maybe don't be a teacher. It's a lot, it's very fulfilling, but, is that going to let you do what you really want to do? And I started to think about it. I was like, well, one, it's going to be really hard to find a job as a theater teacher because, you budget cuts. It's like, oh, we'll just chop the arts first. And so I kind of pivoted and started focusing on geography. And I've always really enjoyed maps. I've always really enjoyed, I know it's kind of cliche to say, but just National Geographic. It's like, what's going on in this? Like, I would read as a kid, and then I like maps. I like the cultural aspect of that. I never really wanted to get into the the cartography aspects. Like, that's fascinating. I'm just not good at that. But then again, I was like, well, I can't be a social studies teacher because it's kind of the same way that the theater teacher goes. So I graduated from college and I just didn't really know what to do. So I had studied abroad in Vienna in college, and I spent about 8 months over in Europe, went everywhere, but most of my time was spent in Vienna. And Vienna is one of the 2 major capital cities in the world that have vineyards in its city limits. So it was really easy to kind of go out and just go to a vineyard and see a vineyard. And you go around Europe and they have a much more laissez-faire approach, not even laissez-faire, but just like welcoming approach to wine than we do in this country. So I kind of started to, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll have dinner and wine and da-da-da-da-da. You go to Vienna, and then it just started to kind of sink in more and more. And then I was like, oh, this kind of ties to storytelling and geography. And I started to kind of knit it together. And once I came back, I realized I really liked wine. And I guess I'm jumping around here. This is before I moved to New York. But my last year of college, I went and worked at Sweet Cheeks Winery. I kind of hounded the winemaker to hire me, and I remember I started in like April, and I was like, hey, I really want to do a harvest. I know nothing, and I read the wine Bible, so I want to learn. And like the GM at the time was like, no, we're not gonna, like, I don't know if I got the runaround or I just wasn't persistent enough or what, but eventually Mark hired me and I did a harvest there. This was 2009. And then I started working in the tasting room, and then they're like, well, can you do the deliveries? And so I was like, sure, but I had class on Thursdays, so I was like, I just won't go to this class on Thursdays and try to make it work because I want to take this. And that was a harvest season. I started in August and I ended in April, May, and then graduated, kind of tootled around for the summer, kind of doing the same summer job I had, which was selling sunglasses and like working at a food cart that my girlfriend in college's cousin owned all over the Northwest, like monster burrito, monster sausage, and it was great. I mean, I really enjoyed doing that, and I got to travel. We get all over, but after kind of when you're out of college and you're like, I don't know if I want to spend another slinging hot dogs in a dusty field. I need to do something else. So that initially led to going back to New York to visit some friends that lived out there and realizing, wow, this is a lot better than August and when I went before. I went during the holidays, and it just clicked. So at the time I was working at a restaurant, kind of doing serving in Eugene, this restaurant called June. I'd somehow convinced the owner to let me do the wine. She's like, sure, yeah, knock yourself out. And it was just super basic. And I was like super empowered. It's like, yes, I get to do wine. And I didn't really know anything. I was trying to taste. The reps would be like, and I know now they're like, I need to unload this. So could you just want a case? Like, I was like, sure. And I realize now that they had like a quota or an incentive, but whatever, it was fine. It was fun. And they gave me an opportunity to just kind of do my thing. So I moved to New York. And I got a job at a restaurant, and really, really quickly, like 3 days, like you get on Craigslist, got a job at a restaurant, and it was a whole other world. I mean, just the pace, the people, the way that you approach a dining experience, it was just night and day from the way that you approach things here and in Eugene. And I realized that kind of, it's to be expected. It's New York City, but I'd never experienced it. And now that I was in it, I just remember this one moment I was standing, and it feels like it was forever, but it probably was 5 seconds. But standing, I'd been working there maybe 3 days, and it was just this busy, hustling, like French brasserie. There's cabs going by outside. It was on 9th and 44th, this restaurant called Marseille. And it was just like, I live in New York City now, and this is my life. And I walk outside, and Times Square is right there, and and I work with this kind of just mix of people, like this, the Spanish guy, this Argentine guy, these, 2 Nigerian guys, this guy from, where was Prince from? From Burma, from Myanmar, And it was just this really interesting group of people, and then I kind of got thrown into it, and it just, and at that point, I was like, okay, I can do this. It's good money, it's tips, it's New York, so but that's kind of where I hit that wall of like, I don't really know what to do next. I feel like a lot of people move to a place and they're like, I have a plan for what I want to do. And I really admire those people because they're like, I'm specifically going to do this. And I moved there with my plan being moved to New York. And then I got there and I was like, okay, I'm here and I have a job and I'm sleeping on a couch and I have like 6 weeks of lodging set up. And I don't know what to do after that. New York's really expensive. So I blew through my savings in like 6 weeks. And I was like, I need to figure out something more sustainable. And the sommelier that worked at the restaurant was a Chilean guy, and with a very un-Chilean name. His name was Jonathan Charnay. Super not Chilean name, but I've realized now that I met like a Robert Jackson in Chile once, and I was like, oh, where in the States are you from? And he's like blonde, green-eyed, and he's like, oh, I was born in Santiago. I was like, all right, cool. Very not a Chilean name either, but whatever. Anyway, Jonathan was great, and we were a French brasserie, so we had mostly French wines, but he had a Carignan and a Sauvignon Blanc from Chile. And that really, I was like, oh, this is cool. And we started doing tastings, and we would do staff trainings and on different wines. He would lead us through it. And I talk about this like it was a long time, but I really worked there like 3 months. And it feels like a long time because, you do double shift from like brunch to midnight, and then you're like, it was very surreal. Mm-hmm. And then I don't even remember how I found it, but I somehow came across a posting for a job at an organization called Wines of Chile, which is basically the Chilean version of the Oregon Wine Board. And I applied, I interviewed, I got the job. And at the time, I had like one suit that I bought because I was like, I'm moving to New York. I need a suit because that's what people wear in New York, right? And I had a variety of different clothes, but I was sleeping on, I don't know what it's called, but it's like the cheapest IKEA couch possible. It's the one that doesn't really fit anyone over 5 foot. Like if you roll out the cushion, I mean, I'm sure I'm 5'8", but like from my like mid thigh down, like nothing is on the couch, and it's terribly uncomfortable. I had no dresser, and I got this job, and I was sleeping there, and it was sweaty. It was July at this point, and I like would take off my clothes, and I didn't have a closet or hanger, so I'd like drape them over the back to like try to keep them pressed. And anyway, I got hired, and it was just me and this other person, my boss, Lori, who was the executive director, and I worked at a shelf, literally a shelf, and we are in this little office space, and we are inside of this kind of Chilean culinary arts store connected to a Chilean wine shop. And I had never really worked in marketing. It was like a marketing assistant, marketing associate position. Mm-hmm. I was still very passionate about wine, and I was like, okay, this is an entry into wine that's not serving, that's not working in a restaurant, that's not working production or something. Like it's it's New York, so there's not really any wine production going on, or at least there wasn't in 2010, or maybe there was, but somewhere in Brooklyn, I don't know. Yeah, I mean that kind of just started in a much more solidified way. Like, okay, I'm going to pursue this. I'm going to see where this goes, and I'm going to kind of lean into this experience and this connection to wine that happens to be a Chilean wine. Like, I don't really know anything about that. I realize now they make wine and they make a lot of it, but since then that has just that was the catalyst for really the rest of my career up until this point. Mm-hmm. And Lori was an amazing mentor and boss, and everything that I would hope to expect out of someone who has high expectations of you and wants you to succeed, but it just really is going to hold you really accountable and make you and push you into challenges and things that maybe you're not ready for, but it's like, okay, just go and do it. And but it takes the time to work and educate you, and it just 2.5 years there was an experience. It was an incredible experience, and I learned a lot. And I became very, very familiar with kind of the peripheries of an industry that is very small, and in an environment that was kind of the hub in many ways of the wine industry, in a way that's kind of the opposite of what like California is for like the production of wine, and kind of the tourism hub of the industry. New York is that other side of it. It's the sort of the publication hub of it. It is the sort of the restaurant hub of it, the on-premise hub of it, with deep roots, and an industry itself, upstate. And I never really thought, and sitting here now, I never really thought that working at Wines of Chile would sort of keep me involved in the Chilean wine industry, or bring me back to Oregon, or bring me to sitting here. It was a job at a time about something I was passionate about, and I felt very fortunate to be able to do it and take part in it, and that they gave me a chance to do it. And it thrust me into a world that I hadn't really ever known, or I didn't know existed. We did liaising with importers and distributors in the wineries in Chile, but also working with master sommeliers to go do master classes about Chilean wine all across the country, and being able to travel and experience the way that they taught about these wines and educated about these wines. Because the wine industry, I guess this is a criticism, and I think it's changing a little bit, but the wine industry is very pro sort of wine, all wine. And then there are exceptions. And, Chile has always been a major hurdle with the trade. There is a major bias against what Chile produces and what Chile is, and the wines coming from there, because a lot of the sort of leaders and buyers and sort of decision makers in the industry have a notion of what Chile was, and not really of what it is or what it's becoming. And I think that's what's kept me endlessly fascinated with it, is unlike the enamored regions of Europe, the regions that we're enamored with in Europe, France and Italy and Spain, which make beautiful wine. I mean, there's no question they make beautiful wine, but they don't. Chile doesn't have that history in the way that we've given them that history here. Over the last history of the wine industry in the U.S., it doesn't have quite the influence, but Chile is exactly like the U.S. I mean, it's an immigrant country. They brought varieties from the old world to the new, and they just happen to speak Spanish. But what's fascinating about it is they are still evolving. Those industries, I should say, not the industries, but the regions in Europe are pretty entrenched in the way they do things, in tradition, in even the laws that govern what they can and can't plant, what they can and can't make, the list goes on. And Chile, since the rediscovery of Carmenere in '94, took a really hard, long look at itself and what are we doing? What are we planning? Where are we planning it? Let's evolve this. And that's what's kept me with it for so long, because I get to be part of that. I get to be part of that evolution and that story in a way that I can't really be with France or Spain or Italy. And part of it was a strategic choice. I'm not a master sommelier, and I'm not really going to be able to be a leader and decision maker and an advocate in the way I kind of want to be in those regions, because everybody's over there. Everybody's at that party. And I'm like, there's a cool party over here. It just happens to be Chilean. And I know you all think it's bulk juice that's this hodgepodge of red and white for $3. And yeah, it used to be. but it's changing, and let's explore that. And that just kind of been my through line for a long time. But I feel like I'm meandering kind of all over the place. I guess that's the perfect. But from, I guess taking it back, from Wines of Chile, and kind of on that same thread, there was, I started to become more and more frustrated with sort of the homogeneity of what wines we were being offered from Chile, from the wineries and their importers, at Wines of Chile, to sort of use as a tool to convince members of the trade to pay attention to us, to say, take this seriously, or just not even take it seriously, just have a look, like, come on over. Because, it's like, okay, Cabernet, Sauvignon Blanc, from big producers that make, millions of cases a year. And then, I can't remember the guy's name, John Bonet, the San Francisco Chronicle critic, wrote The New California Wine. I came out in probably 2012, 2010 maybe. And it was a really in-depth look at the new California wine, which was kind of, I felt like exactly what he was writing about, what I felt like our challenges were, but in Chile. And it's like you have these big behemoths of the California wine industry that kind of have run roughshod over a lot of grassroots sort of innovation and old vineyards, and just everything became White Zinfandel and Cab and Parkerized and Chardonnay, and that was that. And this book explored sort of the opposite of that. All of a sudden, this wine or importer called Vine Connections kind of came to us at Wines of Chile saying, hey, we have been in business since '98. We have focused on two really weird extremes of Argentine Malbecs before the boom and premium Japanese sake. Completely different from one another, but we really think there's a lot of potential here. We are now going to add Chile to this. And when we first went down to Argentina, or in South America in the late 90s, Chile just wasn't ready. It's ready now. And this is 14 years later. So we're going to put together a portfolio of these boutique Chilean wineries that we're calling the New Chile. And we need your help, Wines of Chile, to kind of find someone to kind of take on a role to be our ambassador, salesman, sort of person to go and talk about these and drive these in the trade and the on-premise. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, like this is exactly what I want to do. And up until that point, I had no idea. I was like, maybe I'll go work at Palm Bay. Okay, then I have to commute to Long Island. Like that, I'd rather scratch my eyes out. And I don't have a car, so it's like, maybe I'll go work at some of the other big importers in New York, which, Frederick Wildman, or, maybe a distributor or something. But I don't know, I wasn't there. Like I just didn't, that wasn't really my cup of tea at the moment. This came along, and they hired me, and I used a phrase in my interview that I still think about it now. I'm like, I think it worked at the time. I don't know if it's, I don't know how well it's aged, but they're like, why should we hire you? And I was like, because I'm a gringo. Like, it would be like me being from Oregon, being like, buy Oregon wine. I'm really passionate about it. I'm from here, Oregon, and I get that argument. At the same time, it's not that I don't think people from Chile or South America should advocate and say, I don't think that's a bad choice, but I was like, I'm convinced about the future of what's going on down here, and I'm not from there. I haven't grown up with it. I came to it totally unexpected, and I was like, I'm captivated. I am fascinated by what is going on down there. Let me tell that story. And there are many other voices that need to be heard, but like, I don't know if it was a bias that I felt like was, but I also wanted the job. Like I wanted them to hire me, and then like I said, I don't know if that's aged well, but it made sense at the time, and they hired me. And it was a wild ride, and I got to travel a lot, and I went to Chile a lot, and it was really, it was more of an in-depth look than I ever thought I'd have, because I got to kind of springboard off of what I'd been doing with Wines of Chile and really delve into it and start to tell about these stories that were from these little boutique wineries from, a 6,500 foot dry Pedro Jimenez vineyard in the Andes in the north to, Chardonnay being made in Oregon, basically the Oregon of Chile. And I was like, oh, I'm sold. I want to keep doing this. But the travel after 2 years was killing me, and it was just, I was like, it's time. I'm never in New York. New York's expensive. I'm never here. Literally all of my things are in a storage unit because I had the radical notion of like, I'm just not gonna have an apartment. I'm just gonna put my things in storage, and I'll come back in 9 months and see where I'm at. That's a cheaper rent for a storage unit than having an apartment. And I came out here a lot more, and it's home, so I just found myself when I had downtime coming out here more. So I eventually made the decision, like, you know what? If I'm going to keep doing this, I'm going to base myself in Oregon. I want to move home. I think I had a notion in the back of my mind that I eventually kind of wanted to work my way into the Oregon wine industry again, in a much more sort of permanent way than just doing a harvest. And at this point, it had been about 5 years. And then I came here. I had been here like 2 months, and then I lost my job. They are the biggest supplier that Vine Connections had from Argentina, pulled out, went to another importer, and so like 8 of us got let go. And I was like, oh my God, I just uprooted myself again and have moved back to Oregon. I'm in Portland. I just got an apartment, but now I don't have a job. It's like, cool, okay, great. Damn it. And then I actually went back to Wines of Chile. I reached out to them. I was like, hey, could you have like some freelance work I could do? I'm trying to cobble together some stuff. And they were like, it was a different executive director at this point, who I'd kind of met and known and knew from before. And she's like, oh, sure, like you can do some of our reports, like the Gomberg report or Nielsen report, like put those together, organize them, and do all that stuff and send it out to the industry, to our members. And I was like, oh, great, I love spreadsheets. I really like spreadsheets. I don't know why, but I do. And so I started doing that, and then she's like, oh, hey, like we're gonna be at Pebble Beach Food and Wine. I don't really like the marketing assistant that we have. Like, I don't think they're really up for this job. Like, do you want to come down and help us out? I was like, yeah, I want to go to Pebble Beach Food. I've never been before. Like, I absolutely. So we get down there, and we're having dinner, and she's like, I don't feel good. I was like, okay, like, and her husband was there, and like, and then she eventually went to the ER. She's like, I have to have an appendectomy right now. Could you just run the show? And I was like, okay, cool. It's like getting back into the driver's seat from what I'd been doing 2-ish years prior when I left Wines of Chile. And it went off. She had her appendectomy. It was all done. I came home. She called me. She's like, okay, I fired Philip. Do you want a job? And I was like, that's not what my intention was. This is a totally unexpected thing, but yes, I do. I will totally take that. And I think it was kind of a blessing and a curse, because it was my first, I think about it now, it was my first time working remotely, because she was on the East Coast, and I was just working, 12 inches from my bed at my desk. And she was a very different boss than my previous one was at Wines of Chile. Much less organized and much less detail oriented, but far more creative and exceptionally creative. And I was like, okay, but I mean, it killed me after a year. I was like, I'm miserable. I cannot keep doing this. This is just, I can't keep working remotely. She's driving me crazy. Like, I need to. This is temporary. I didn't want to come back here. It was a good sort of Band-Aid. What can I need to, I'm here, I'm in Oregon, I want to get into the Oregon wine industry. And That was, I can't remember at this point if it was easy or hard or just like, I remember I applied to a bunch of places, and I remember a friend of mine who had grown up in Dundee had taken me to Penerash back in like 2009, and we went for the Riesling, beautiful old vine Highland Riesling, and so I applied, and as their like club manager marketing role, and they ended up hiring me, and I was stoked, and I was like, okay, yes, this is what I was looking for. Like I want to go work at a boutique organ producer, and I want to, I've never done DTC, but it combines a lot of things that I really like: storytelling, marketing, sort of interacting and working with customers and I'd never really been able to tell intimate stories about these wines because I had to do it on a much like 50,000 foot level, because it's like, let's tell the story of a country as opposed to a wine from a single vineyard. We never really got to get into that level of detail at Wines of Chile, or even Vine Connections. We got closer to it, but there was 12 wineries to juggle, and here there was one, and I was like, this is fantastic. And 6 weeks later, they sold the Jackson family, and that was not what I was expecting at all. That too was a blessing and a curse. I have a whole lot to say about that. I'm sure a lot of people in the industry do. I've thought about this before, and I'm like, how am I going to talk about this? Because they are a major player here now, and they are a good company, and I do really admire the wines and their dedication to viticulture and their dedication to their willingness to take risks. I think that's something that doesn't exist much in the Oregon wine industry. Let me take that back. I don't think that exists much within the wine industry. I don't think the wine industry is a particularly innovative industry. I think we're kind of slow movers in that regard, with embracing new sort of techniques, philosophies, maybe outside of winemaking. That's never been my area of expertise, so I can't speak about the way that they're innovating and bringing new techniques and whatnot. But in my experience in the industry, it's an old white guys club for a large part, and I'm a white guy, and I recognize that I don't really want to be part of that old model, but how do you begin to sort of innovate outside of that and embrace an alternative and move in that direction? And I think Jackson Family does that well enough, but I never really signed up to go work for a California winery that had been started by, 20 years prior in Oregon. Kind of that second wave of winemakers coming into Oregon, like Lynn was, and that they built, and just that was an exciting story to tell. And I was like, oh my God, how do I then tell the story of like, well, we're now owned by a California winery? How does that? Some people won't care. Some people will be like, you're awful. Like, we don't ever want to be part of your club again, and we don't want to do business with you. And others, it'll go kind of unnoticed. But that's from a customer standpoint. I mean, I think from the industry standpoint, I know that's still like pretty, I don't know if heated is the wrong word, but I think that's a device. I think it's an issue with a lot of tension in Oregon. And, California's not the only one coming here. I mean, Louis Jadot is here. The Bollinger family just came here. I mean, the Drouin family has been here for, 30 years, 40 years. I think there's always been a rivalry between Oregon and California in a lot of ways, and this is just kind of the latest sort of theater of that. And it's touching an industry that people are very passionate about because it's literally rooted in the ground. And I think people get protective about that. And I can empathize with that. At the same time, from a personal sort of personal journey business standpoint, it was really, I learned a lot. And it reminded me of something Lori said when I left Wines of Chile. She talked about, she was like, go work for a big company. Learn the systems. Learn the way that they approach things, because that's invaluable. You put it in your back pocket and use it elsewhere, but go work for a big company and just learn the way that they do things. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. And I went and worked for Vine Connections, not a big company, much smaller, much more boutique. And they're, pros and cons, and I was like, well, okay, I guess now it's been thrust upon me that this is my opportunity to learn from a big company. And that was really beneficial. I really valued the takeaways I had from that. But at the same time, that was a hard transition. And I don't think that was something that Lynn and Ron really prepared their employees for outside of production. And I don't criticize or fault Lynn or Ron for selling to Jackson Family whatsoever. I think that was a decision they made for themselves, and I think it made a lot of sense, particularly with her ability to continue to sort of exert her influence and her control and shepherd her company and her wines in her way. And Jackson Family allowed that. And I think that was wonderful, because that's what they bought. At the same time, you're like, oh, okay, as employees, like, none of us really signed up to work for that. Now we have to get on board with this new way of working and thinking. And, Jackson Family's, I always talk about, I had two different bosses there. And I really wish I had the second one first and the first one second, because of the way that they approach things. It's like learning a new language. I don't speak, when I started there, I didn't speak Jackson Family. I had no idea what this form was, that, this, that, and the other thing, and they knew to approach it this way, and I didn't speak the language, so the learning curve was steep. And we're all kind of in the same boat trying to juggle this, but like all of our support mechanisms were in California. And thank God we had Eugenia Keegan, because she's just a wonderful human being, and she is a remarkable diplomat and a remarkable sort of translator in a whole host of ways. And just her ability to just take kind of what their asks were and translate it for, like, this is what they're asking you to do, that they just word it this way, and we're like, oh. And I mean, she was invaluable, and also just trying to manage, like, how do we begin to interact with Lynn and Ron again? Because I can't even imagine the stress and the emotional not turmoil, but just like upheaval that they went through in selling something that they created like that. And now, how then do they manage and navigate this new world and process? But people are, even if people say they aren't selfish, we all have selfish tendencies, and we're like, hey, this isn't fair. This is not working out. This is not what I signed up for. And I get that. And I totally, I cannot be fully altruistic all the time. And, and I think we just have to be willing to step back and take a long, hard look at, like, what are we asking and what are we hoping for? And can I learn something from this? And can I step back and I see the forest through the trees? And I almost said, can you see, like, the grapes through the grapevine, the vineyard? But that's
Too on the nose.
It's too on the nose. I like puns, but I'm terrible at them. Every once in a while, I get one that's like just gold, and then I can never remember it. My wife is a pun machine. She is exceptional at them, and I was like, anyway, that's a total tangent.
Stepping back and seeing the bigger picture. Yeah,
and that was a really hard time. I had also just started in graduate school at the time, and I remembered very distinctly, like, I'd probably been in grad school at like 4 or 5 months at that point. Maybe I was just finishing the first or semester, or just started the second. And my boss at the time, the first boss that I really wish I had second, I remember him saying something to me along the lines of, like, well, that's really a commitment that you should have thought about before you started, and it just kind of this like questioning, like, why am I doing that? I was like, man, I didn't know you were going to buy this place. Like, I'm making decisions for myself. I had no idea that this was going to come my way. And that was a very hard period of time. And I eventually left. I was just kind of done with it. I finished grad school. And, it's like, okay, great. I finished grad school. I got my MBA because I have a theater degree and a geography degree. And like, I have a theater degree and a geography degree, which are wonderful degrees. Like, but I needed some hard skills, and I needed a potential employer to be able to look at me and see past that and not have to explain the value of those degrees and how they bring them. Because that might be my third interview, and I really need to get a foot in the door. So I want to get an MBA. I want to get a something with a little more harder skills. Plus, I love spreadsheets. A lot of spreadsheets in that, and that was a good choice, and I'm really, really happy I did it. And but that kind of, once I finished that, this is in 2018, early 2018. That kind of was the beginning of my sort of exit from Jackson Family and Penner-Ash, and I look back on that, and I'm really happy I worked there. I really am. I mean, Lynn makes beautiful wines, and Lynn is a very tenacious person, and she speaks her mind, and I really admire that, and I she was the first female winemaker hired in Oregon in an all boys club, and she made her mark, and she said, no, I'm going to do it this way. And I admire that, and I it's like she then, and I had to remind myself, she chose to work with Jackson Family. They just didn't show up, I assume, with a blank check. I've met Barbara Ranke several times. She is a very thoughtful, detail-oriented woman, and she doesn't make decisions lightly, nor does Lynn. And I think sometimes people think that would lead to conflict, but I think it leads to a mutual respect. And anyway, I had to remind myself of that like Lynn chose to sell. Lynn and Ron chose to sell this. Like they had there was more to it about this than just the money that they got from selling it. It was about how is our name, not only our wines, but how is that going to be stewarded with this new company? Mm-hmm. How are they going to caretake that for something that we've poured 20 years of passion and sweat and blood and tears into? And, I had to kind of come back and think like, there was a reason why she did that. And I have to trust that. And, and I have my own frustrations with that whole transition, but I look back on it. I mean, hindsight is 20/20, and like, I'm glad I went through that. I do not want to go through it again. There's my wife. It was a really hard period of time. I don't want to go to grad school again and do all that at the same time. That was miserable. But it really couldn't have happened at a better time, and it really couldn't have. I was able to draw a lot of what was happening there and apply it to school, and just vice versa. And I'm happy I went through it. It shouldn't all be easy, and it never is anyway. So. But I thought a lot about like, how do I talk about this? Because some of the people there are, still there, and others of us, we talk about it, we're like, oh man, let's get a beer and talk about this. I started to think more about like, okay, what's next? Like, do I go get a job at another winery? And then as I started to spelunk around and like look for things, I would kind of encounter various wineries that wanted to hire a position they called, wine club manager or like national sales manager. But really it included a variety of other roles, which included working in the tasting room or helping them deal with an inventory issue. And it's not that I thought anybody was not being transparent. I think there are some that want to sign up and like, hey, I want to do all the grunt work. I want to be your national sales manager and scrub the tanks and work in the tasting room and do your social media. That's wonderful, and I really admire those people's grit, but like I did not want to do that. I was like, if you're going to hire me for a job, let me fully do that job. And like, if you have an inventory issue, let's really focus on that and let's incentivize moving those out. So I kind of found myself. I found a position with Fetzer, which was a Northwest-based sort of district manager, and I thought about like, ooh, Fetzer. They make like $7 wine, don't they? But they've been around a long time, and I was like, well, I have already worked for one big company. This is another big company. I also knew that they were owned by, coincidentally, Conchitoro, which is the big Chilean winery, and a big global winery. They're like the 5th largest winery in the world. That's an interesting Chile connection. And I started to think about like, okay, what have I've worked in DTC, I've worked in a tasting room, I've worked a harvest, I've worked for a trade association, I have worked for a small boutique winery, I've done direct sales, marketing, like worked, kind of dabbled in the various educational aspects with the Guild and the Society of Wine Educators, with Wines of Chile and whatnot. I've never worked for a company that is predominantly focused on chains. And by and large, a majority of the wine sold in this country is sold through retail and chains. And, most of the Oregon wine is not, but I mean, A to Z, that's their lifeblood. King Estate, before they sold Acrobat, that was their lifeblood. Many of the other larger wineries here, Willamette Valley, I mean, that is how they do the volume they do. I mean, you're not going to sell 250,000 cases of wine just in Oregon of Pinot Gris. It's just not going to happen. That was the other thing I really admired about Lynn. Neither of us really care for Pinot Gris. And I was like, okay, I'm not alone. There are some exceptions, but by and large, I was like, I just can't. Oregon's Pinot Gris is wonderful, and there's some good stuff, but it just became all like Acrobat. And that's fine, but then everybody did it. And that's a story for a later time. But I was like, yeah, Lynn, okay, I'm not crazy. We're on the same page here. She had a zeal for Riesling. I have a zeal for Riesling. And anyway, I thought about Fetzer from kind of a strategic standpoint. Like, I've never worked in chains. I don't speak that language. I don't know how to sell pallets. But I was like, this is a good choice. Like, I need to know that. If I'm going to work in this industry, even if it's something I don't want to do for the future and spend my whole life, trying to sell to Costco or Kroger, I need to learn how it's done. I need to understand how it works, because, what do I want to do when I grow up? I don't quite know, but I mean, if it's being a general manager of a winery or kind of working even for a boutique importer, knowing how that world works is essential to that. And I'm not going to get that experience without working in a company that focuses on that. So, that led me to Fetzer. And the more I started to learn about Fetzer, and I was like, oh, this is more than just $7 wine. This is a B Corp. This is the kind of the progenitor of organic viticulture in the United States with Bonterra. I mean, this is a despite it being strange at the time, an innovator in the sense of doing bourbon barrel aged wines, which not my cup of tea, but I that's unique. That's innovative. Like, I don't really always think of the wine industry as being particularly innovative. That's changing, and I think that really has changed over the last decade. But okay, that's interesting. What do you guys do with DTC? Like, what does Fetzer do with DTC? What do they do with small boutique production wines? Oh, nothing. But there's a lot. They have a lot to work with. There's just nothing that exists there when I started. And it really all came down to selling Casa del Diablo, Fetzer, Bonterra, 1,000 Stories, and doing demos and doing things like that, and working with our distributors to help move thousands of cases. And that, again, was really that was a necessary learning, because whether I like it or not, that exists. That's just how the industry operates. That's entrenched in our system that we have. I'd love to sell every drop of wine to a boutique wine shop that's down around the corner, but they just can't absorb that much. And They make way too much wine for that to happen, and you can't convince everybody that a $50 bottle of wine is a reasonable purchase. People are like, absolutely not. I'm going to buy an $8 wine. I'm going to be happy. Great. There's no reason that shouldn't exist. But then again, there's no reason that you can't make $8 wine at a good quality either. And that's a whole other debate about pricing and quality, but I'll leave that. Yeah. So from there, right after I started, the woman who hired me, Jen Iverson, our VP of the West, was like, "There's a big announcement coming," and I was like, "Oh my God!" And I'd been there like 3 weeks at the time, and I was like, "If this is another repeat, like if we're being bought by like Constellation or like some other, I don't even know what could potentially happen." Brown-Forman's coming back. I can't go through that again. I just want to work at a job that I'm like, I signed up for this, and not have it be kind of ripped out from under me a month later. And then adapt to that new environment that I didn't necessarily have transparency when I signed up for it. It actually wasn't that bad. It turns out that the importers of Conchi Toro's wines, Banfi, and Excelsior, based on the East Coast, that imported all the, Castello Banfi and a lot of Italian stuff, Conchi Toro was pulling their South American portfolio and bringing it to Fetzer, which at this point it was like 8 years after they had bought Fetzer. So I was like, well, that took a while. But they finally brought all their Chilean stuff over, and I was like, okay, this is unexpected, but I feel like I have a unique background to sort of get into this. And Fetzer then started to embrace more of a kind of a fine wine approach. Like, we make all these other like single vineyard biodynamic wines that we make 400 cases of. These single block of single vineyard wines out of Chile that really highlight, some crazy guy in Chile, Ignacio Recabarren's idea of terroir, but it happened in the 80s, when nobody in Chile even knew what they had planted half the time. And it just held on. And I always talk about like the idea of terroir is not a new concept, and like we talk about it's ubiquitous now in any conversation about wine. That didn't exist in Chile in a really manifested way until the 80s and early 90s. That's just not what they were set up for. That's not how they were taught, and it's changed drastically and really led internally. And from there they brought that over, and then I was like, okay, there's a unique opportunity here to kind of leverage my skills and experience in this new way. They started to then dabble in DTC, and they hired a VP that was going to focus exclusively on our fine wine portfolio. She hired me to kind of act as their brand ambassador, and it was a collection of multiple origins from Argentina, Chile, and California. I didn't have to sell Fetzer anymore. I didn't have to sell, Casier del Diablo. Nothing wrong with those wines. It's not my cup of tea. I'm happy to, my passion lies in the small, and that's what I wanted to do. And those are the stories I wanted to tell. There's just much more meat on that bone, without being contrived, and sort of marketing driven, or corporate driven. And then the pandemic hit, and then I was like, oh God. Well, this is the first thing to go, but it didn't. And my boss, her name was Stephanie, she left, and then this new guy came in named Sebastian, and he had been with Conchi Toro for years, and he's based in Chile, and since then it's been this little kind of cohort of us. This guy in Florida, my colleague Italo and Sebastian, that have really been sort of trying to shepherd this new fine wine portfolio that we call the Origins Collection, which is a focus on the multiple origins and kind of the small of what we do. 12 brands with maybe a total of like 25,000 cases, 30,000 cases, and for a company that will make 3 million cases of one Cabernet, that's That's small. And we have been sort of working in that the last year and a half to kind of guide, shepherd this, and sort of find common ground and focus and attention from our own team to say there is worth in selling these wines. You know, you can do your job and not just sell a pallet of Bonterra, you know, Sauvignon Blanc. There is opportunity here to really tell a different story and really live our what Barney Fetzer talked about in the very beginning, which is like what's good for the earth is good for the grape, and what's good for the grape is good for the wine. And at its simplest, that's kind of the ethos behind all of this, and we just get to do it on a small level, and that's kind of been what I've been doing the last 18 months. But in all that, sitting at home, I am a bit of a restless soul. I like doing things and projects, and I was like, I can't just do the corporate thing. I can't just, you know, I need my own outlet. I need my own outlet of creativity. I need my own outlet of my own view and voice on these things. And so I was like, I don't know how difficult it is to start a company or get an OLCC license, but I'm gonna try. I think at the time, it was like April, and everybody was like, oh my God, get your toilet paper, get your wine, and like don't go anywhere. So in our group of friends, I was like, oh, hey, everybody, like, please don't go by like Dark Horse or like, you know, whatever, you know, I don't even, you know, not to knock Dark Horse, but I can knock Dark Horse. It's fine. But like, just go buy some things with a little more like personality. Like, you all have enjoyed drinking wines with me. Like, you're like, oh, this is cool. I never experienced this grape. Like, what if I put together a little pack? Like, the pandemic's going on. We're all going to be home. Like, let me just put together like a little suggestion of what you could go out and do. And then I was like, well, this could be something. This could be a business. This could be, I could start to kind of play off this. And then it was actually really easy to get an LCC license. I had no idea, but it was really easy. My garage is a licensed OLCC retail off-premise. I can't drink in there, which is very bizarre to me. It's like my own garage that I had to rent to myself, and I can't like have a glass of wine in there because it's an off-premise retailer. And I get that, but I was like, this is funny, but okay. But they allow it, and it then gave me the legality to just start doing this. And I was like, okay, well, I'll get a business. I'll register with the state, and thus Multnomah Wine Studio was born. And part of it kind of evolved out of, we have one wine shop in our neighborhood. I mean, I live right by John's Marketplace, which is like the west side of Portland's version of sort of Belmont Station or like Horse Brass, like this kind of iconic beer shop that is just endlessly overwhelming. They do have wine there, but it's not really a wine shop. I mean, that's not really their expertise. You know, it's like, oh, well, we have wine because people come in and they ask for it, so we'll have a selection, but that's not really our cup of tea. Mm-hmm. There is one wine shop in the village, which is just only focuses on Northwest wine, and it is just this, I've thought about how to say this tactfully without like disparaging her business, because it has been there for 17 years, but it just seems really lonely. It just, you know, I know there are customers out there who want to go to a wine shop where there's like the Velveteen Rabbit and another stuffed animal sitting at a little bistro table playing chess. I feel like that's a little outdated. And I feel like it just, that just doesn't really have a lot of, it just seems musty. It needs some new life into it. And like, we've lived in our little community now and for 5 years, and we're like, we need something that has just a little more zest to it. You know, I mean, I'm a millennial. The boomers are our arch nemesis, and you know, it's like our neighborhood is a lot of boomers, and it's like there is a new way to, and there are other ways to tell the story than just sitting next to the Velveteen Rabbit playing checkers to have my only Northwest wine in a really deep, cavernous, blood red, just kind of dank place. I go to all these other wine shops around Portland on the east side, particularly, and like Division Wines. I'm like, oh, this place is great. Or Southeast Wine Collective, or even Broadway Wines downtown, like La Cave, that little kind of cave area, which I really want to go back to, and Park Avenue. I mean, the list goes on and on. And it has an assortment and collection and voice that transcends just the Northwest. And it's not just that, it's just like, this just needs some new life breathed into it. Like our little strip, our little village is just kind of full of like bead shops, like a frame store, and like a kind of a dank wine shop. Like we need more than that here. So anyway, I digress. Multnomah Wine Studio was born, and the idea was essentially to, create thematic packs that, and not like old world, new world, California, things that are a little more off the cuff and a little more sort of maybe not provocative is the right word, but maybe to non-wine people. Like I have a pack that I'm going to release this weekend called Hot Grill Summer. I barely know Megan Thee Stallion, but my friends are like, oh, that's totally a Megan Thee Stallion song from 2019, and I was like, I did not realize that. That's awesome. I'm going to totally play off Hot Girl Summer, and I'm going to have Hot Grill Summer because it doesn't just have to be Cab and Zinfandel. Like, let's play around with some stuff. And, or like wines to drink alone. It's the pandemic. Please don't go and drink with friends, but these are also great wines to have by themselves. You don't have to pair them with food. They pair really well with a glass. Or, beyond organic. Like, what are people doing out there that's just not organic wine or organically grown wine? What is this whole natural wine, and just playing off different ideas like that, and taking a very, very diverse world of wine and trying to put it into a little theme that people can be like, I've never thought to explore this. I've never thought to kind of, I go to the grocery store and I know Chardonnay, I know Pinot Gris, I know Pinot Noir, and I know Cabernet and Merlot, but like, what else is out there? I've never had Nerello Moscalese. I've never had Mourvedre. I've never had, Glera. Let's introduce those. So it has been a work in progress, and it's totally kind of a side hustle that evolved out of the pandemic, but it gives me a voice, and it gives me an opportunity to just kind of be like, I'm going to unabashedly just present this in the way I want to present it. And, people are going to read what I write, and they're going to be like, that's not grammatically correct. I'm like, I don't really care. I'm not in it for that. Like, this is just the way I talk about it. And, Faulkner, I think, once said, like, with the stream of consciousness, I'm just going to put a whole page of commas at the back, and you put them where you want to, because this is just the way I write. And I'm like, okay, well, Faulkner was questionable, but in a lot of ways. But I appreciated that sentiment, and I haven't gotten that feedback, thank God, so far. Nobody's like, you're a grammar. I'm not a grammarian. My dad totally is. He's an English German teacher, and he's very much like, get the grammar right. I'm like, I can't. I'm not built that way. So yeah, I mean, this has kind of been a project that's been going on a little over a year, and it is just kind of me and my wife. She will oftentimes allude to like, oh, like this pack, or like, let's play with this, or like, whatever. It's a collaborative effort in our ability to kind of create this and guide it, and just, I have no really ambitions of building this into a giant like e-commerce giant or like rivalwine.com, but I like the idea of what like Garage East up in Seattle does. I'm like, we have a mailing list. You're not obligated to buy it. Just sign up. I'm going to send you this. If you want to buy it, buy it. If you don't, cool. If not, just come and learn a little bit. And I like that approach. I didn't want to obligate people to purchase. I just wanted to give them the option. And then I saw that you interviewed Kate, who I used to work with at Penn International. I was like, oh, Kate, yeah. And then I'm very humbled that you're like, do you want to be interviewed? And I was like, sure. Like, that would be really wonderful. yes. So here we are.
That answers like all of the questions that I have. So I got plenty of questions to go back to.
Oh no,
That
please.
is a wonderful answer to my second question. I'm very, very appreciative of all of that. So I want to go back a little bit to early on, wine education for yourself. You mentioned WSET, you mentioned some of the things you did. I'm curious about, once wine became a passion for you, what were the ways you educated yourself, both kind of palate-wise and just sort of about wine? What did you find effective? And tell us about kind of your experience with sort of formal and informal wine education.
Yeah. So I went through the intro and certified with the Guild, and then went through WSET 3, kind of in fits and starts, but through WSET 3, I didn't ever want to continue more with the Guild because I was like, I'm not going to work as a server. I don't want to work in restaurants anymore. I've been there, I've done that. It's wonderful, bless those people, but I don't have the temperament for it. And to be perfectly honest, and the WSET was a bit more of sort of less about service and more about just kind of geeking out. And I was like, I like rocks, I like dirt, let's talk about that. I haven't really been involved in that many formal taster groups, and that's something I've kind of wanted to try to find around here. I know that I just haven't really explored it, and the pandemic kind of shuttered all that. But prior to that, honestly, it was really being able to, New York has an endless supply of wines from everywhere. I mean, and just going to different places that allowed you to taste things like Terroir, that kind of iconic wine bar in New York, used to do, I think it was on Wednesdays, they would do like a free sherry happy hour. And people would be like, free? And he's like, people need to drink this. Sherry's fascinating and wonderful, and you're an idiot if you hate it. And I was like, okay. And that's that. God, what's that guy's name? It'll come to me. I know I can picture his face. Goatee, very outspoken, very passionate. I can't remember his name. It'll come to me. But anyway, he was like, I have to give this away for free because people won't pay for it, but they need to drink it. So it's things like that, going to places like that to experience, like, okay, let's taste this. And then, I mean, tasting and doing the various things through the different sort of formalized classes. And then, honestly, being able to be on the road, like, I felt exceptionally lucky we had an educator that worked with Wines of Chile who was a master sommelier, Fred Dexheimer. And we would travel a lot together, going to various cities with the Guild's master classes that they would do, in 2011, 2013, 2012, and all through that period of time, to teach about Chile. So obviously getting to taste a plethora of Chilean wines here and down there, but then, we'd go out and you'd be like, okay, try this, like, you need to know what this is, or this is a producer that you really need to understand if you're going to understand this region, what have you, and that was an education. That was really wonderful, and just honestly going to a bunch of trade tastings. Like, we would go to different events like Ospitz de Rhone, and being able to experience that and taste around. So I'd say most of it was more informal than sort of that. I really admire the people who are able to take just copious, detailed, encyclopedic notes on their own. I mean, like, I see some of a friend of mine, I think she just left, but she was like the beverage director at like the Four Seasons in Philly. And her notes, it's like, you can publish that into a book. I mean, it's remarkable. Her level of detail and drawings about the wine region she's going through, and just, I can't do that. I'm not that, I don't know if it's patient or detailed. I can't really draw that well. And I fall victim to the old theater adage of, it's like, oh, hey, how many theater kids does it take to change a light bulb? Let's go ride bikes. I get distracted when I have to focus that intently. So my point being, I didn't really go that way. So I needed the formal classes like the WSET 3 to really hone in and invest and get really specific about things that I would otherwise just read, but a lot of it came down to reading too. From Jancis Robinson's books to Karen McNeil to The New California from John Bonet and I think it's all of that stuff. I think I got away from the question. What was it again?
Just about wine education.
Okay.
So you're still on that.
Okay, I'm still there.
Path. Yeah.
I haven't. I'm on a side road. But I find a lot of value in it. Absolutely. I mean, it has been really instrumental in helping me kind of develop really a process for how you taste. Because I mean, you go into wine and you're like, blackberry, like acid, like. I talk to my friends about that. I'm like, do you get that? And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I get that. Like, if you're a novice and you're not you haven't been through kind of formal lessons on what to look for, of course you're not going to know what to do. So having that was invaluable to just be able to pick apart a wine. Like, I can't do it to the level of, the master somms and really the people who work in the industry. And I never was able to experience sort of the plethora of wines that you get to taste that I cannot afford, that you'd get to taste if you're at a nice restaurant in New York. And that if I had gone more that route, that you get to kind of be exposed through staff trainings that your beverage director or your somms team leads you through. That's really incredible. But I kind of missed out on that. And that's fine. And out here, I mean, I try to go to a lot of tasting rooms. Not the last year, but normally, but then I know it kind of gets a little Pinot-centric. And I try to branch out from that. And, my wife and I, we both really like wine. We went to Portugal for our honeymoon because it checked a lot of boxes, and we thankfully got to go before the pandemic. And we're like, we've never taken a long vacation like this. We want to go to a region we've never been. There's wine, there's seafood, it's gentle. Gentle is nice. Let's go there. And I had never experienced half those wines before. I had no idea. I mean, you think of Portugal, it's like, oh, port. Yeah, but then the list goes on. And I was floored and blown away by what existed there. So it's things like that. I mean, it's been much more sort of, I guess in a nutshell, experiential than sort of formalized process, which that's kind of the way I prefer things. It clicks with me better.
So you have really kind of strong understanding or experience in kind of two very, very different wine regions, very interesting wine regions in Chile and in Oregon. I'm curious, from your perspective, tell me the differences. Tell me how they compare and how they contrast between the two regions. What are the similarities and how do they differ?
That's a good question. I say that because like everybody's like, compare and contrast Chile and California. I mean, Chile's 3,000 miles long, so I always describe it as like, you start in the south of Chile, it's like starting in the Willamette Valley. Mayaco, Biobío is like the Willamette Valley. Pinot Noir, Chardonnay dominate. It's sparkling. You move up, it's like going south from here. You get a Napa, Mendocino, and all that. Then you get to northern Chile, and it's outer space. It's the Elquida. I mean, there's nothing else like it on Earth. I mean, 2 inches of rain a year, the ocean, 6,500 foot dry page. I mean, it's crazy. Really, in the last 20 years, I think the similarity is that, and I'm starting to see it now here too, but winemakers in both regions have really begun to move on from sort of the traditional grape varieties of Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, Cabernet and Cabernet, really. Cabernet with other things that they then figured out was Carmenere, and begun to say, well, wait a second, like, we don't have to be confined to the Willamette Valley. We don't have to be confined to Maipo. We don't have to be confined to these grape varieties or these ways of winemaking. Let's branch out. We can do our own thing. Like, this is our own destiny and universe to sort of build in. I think here of like all the new AVAs. I mean, from the Rocks districts to Elkton. I mean, their crew work wines down in Elkton is planting Sauvignon Gris. That's awesome. Like, I didn't even know that existed up here. I first experienced it in Chile. They planted it in 1912, but then nobody did anything with it. And I really admire in both places kind of, I don't even know what wave of winemakers I'd even kind of categorize in Oregon now. I mean, like I talked about Lynn being kind of that second wave, after the David Letts and the Dick Eraths and David Adelsheims of the world. Then Lynn's, I don't know what you call or categorize, for lack of a better word, this kind of new wave. And I think a lot of them rather are, well, I guess that's always been the case. I was going to say from elsewhere. Heritage winemakers, I maybe that's the wrong word, but I think of like, Jason Lett. He took over from his dad. But he is a really classic example of sitting in both worlds. That progenitor of, Pinot Noir really in Oregon and Pinot Gris. But now Jason's planted Chasselas and Melon de Bourgogne and Trousseau. Nobody would have done that before. And I think it gives a lot of credibility to wineries, to having him do it because of who his family is and like his history here. I don't want to say giving the green light, but giving encouragement to others to explore beyond their traditional grape varieties. I see the same thing in Chile, where you've had these sort of older traditional winemakers be kind of both coaxed out of their sort of standard traditional approaches by a combination of both new winemakers that have kind of been able to not have a Chile-specific education and been able to travel and go to other parts of the world, which didn't really exist, they didn't do before, and then come back to Chile and bring that knowledge, as well as some, I think of this one winery, Di Martino, and the winemaker there, Marcelo Ratamal, he's a very interesting man, because you look at him, you're like, you totally could just be this like old kind of Chilean. No, he's not even old, actually. He just, he's not, he's like 45, 50. But just kind of this, he's been at the same winery for 26 years, which for older Chilean winemakers, that they bop around a lot to different wineries in Chile. And he hasn't done that. He stayed at Di Martino, but he's also the type that you see like kind of buttoned up in the traditional like Chilean winemaker, like khakis and a blue shirt. And you're like, oh, really? You all wear that? And but then you see him when he's not sort of toeing the line, in like a Metallica t-shirt, and he's like, I love metal. And I was like, really? And he's like, I love metal. I go to every Metallica concert when they come to Chile, ever. Like, they're the greatest band ever. And I'm like, that is not what I expected you to say at all. And he has embraced approaching things in new ways, like amphora aged Cinsault. Nobody in Chile was doing that. And then here, Marcelo came and he started doing dry farm Cinsault from Itata in an amphora 10 years ago. And that kind of connection between the two, I find really unique and fascinating. And I think each country in its own way has been sort of put in a position to like, you are Pinot country, you are Cabernet country. Oh, you have Carmenere now. You have Carmenere now too. And I think winemakers are beginning to say, I don't even think, I know winemakers are beginning to say there is a world beyond that. And there are grapes beyond that I want to work with and I want to explore and do things with, because there are no rules. And I don't have to follow in these, very particular paths to make wine right. There is no right way of doing it. There's just their expression of art.
I want to talk about your job at Fetzer a little bit. I'm curious about, you mentioned that once again you start your job big announcement, then then COVID hits, like everything kind of swirling against you. But I'm curious with what you're trying to accomplish with your team. Tell me what the biggest challenges are and what your kind of outlook is. What are you hoping for with this kind of small project within a huge brand?
I'm hoping that they won't give up on it. I'm hoping that they see the value in it other than the increased margins of having a direct-to-consumer business. I'm hoping that they see this as a way to more effectively tell our story and kind of go back to the way that Fetzer was when they had a culinary center that Julia Child came to. You know, it's like they started Bonterra because they had an organic garden in the 80s, and they were like, well, why don't we grow our grapes organically? Like and nobody put that on a label then. And they took that risk, they embraced it, and look at it now. You know, it's kind of become, you know, America's premier sort of organically grown wine. And you know, I think, and I look at it too, I'm like, Bonterra, it's, you know, a supermarket brand, but like in the 80s, nobody did that. That was super questionable to put organic on a label. People would be like, whoa, hippies, like, what are you doing? Like, somebody has to take that leap. Somebody has to take that jump. And I'm really hoping that they just don't give up on it. Mm-hmm. I'm really hoping that they see the value in not only all the wine things, the terroir, the story, our ability to express these varieties from this place, but they see the value in it from a business perspective, but they see the value in it from a storytelling and sort of just a historical perspective. Mm-hmm. I mean, our other wineries are doing this, so it's not like, but how do we do it genuinely? How do we do it authentically? That, I think, is the big challenge. You know, and I hope that they're able to take our unique position of being not only a winery owned by another winery, but also an importer, to say, here are a multitude of wines that are, you know, not necessarily one of a kind, but unique enough. And you go to a wine store and you can find a bunch of different small projects. Particularly if you go to a good, you know, and that's fascinating. Well, let's be part of the conversation. We can do that too. You know, just because they're big and we do it this way doesn't mean that we can't focus on the small and get into the details, because I think there's a lot of longevity in that. And I think that I think people want that. I think people want to explore. We always talk about, and this is kind of the corporate line, but not in the corporate line, but like people talk about customers have moved beyond wanting to buy a good product, like Rainforest Alliance or like Certified Sustainable or like Fair Trade, to wanting to support a good company. And I think that's become even more prevalent in the last 5 years, where we're like, well, wait a second, you might make this good product, but like, that's marketing. Mm-hmm. Let's be honest. Are you a good company? Because you can make a good product and do just some really unethical shit. And but you get to mask it by your good product. I think for a variety of reasons, my generation, Gen Z, and even Gen X to a degree, like, we don't really have a patience and tolerance for that anymore. It's like, let's rip the Band-Aid off, man. Like, let's show it for what it is. So it's like, if you're going to be a good company, be a good company. You know, and I'm not saying that all B Corps are the best companies and you only should buy from B Corps, but it's like, that's a step in the right direction. At least it's a third-party accountability. You know, from Patagonia to Ben & Jerry's to, you know, King Arthur Flour. Like, there's somebody looking over your shoulder and saying, if you want our support, you know, or A to Z even, like they're B Corp, you know, Sogelblosser. There's somebody looking over your shoulder to say, are you putting your money where your mouth is? Or is this just this marketing ploy and you hope that people don't really look under the covers? So my hope is that we're able to continue to tell that story about being a good company through our investment in either in our small projects and our small farmers, and this, because at the end of the day, wine's an agricultural product. I mean, they farm grapes. And I think people forget that because they see it as wine and they're like, oh, it's a luxury item. Well, that had to come from a vineyard which is farmed like any other agricultural crop. But it just is able to sort of transform itself into something that we have considered and created into a luxury item. And if we can continue to use our sort of, we being Fetzer, Conchitoro, to do two things. Take our passion and our expertise and our knowledge and focus it on being a better company through our big projects, but also our small projects that benefit small growers, small producers, et cetera, and be able to take a wine and tell that story through that. And secondly, take our innovation and our research to combat the effects of what climate change is going to do to not only the wine industry, but everything, and the agricultural industry particularly. Chile is like California. It is in almost a perpetual drought. If it doesn't snow in the Andes, just like it doesn't snow in the Sierra, kind of screwed. And there's only so long that we can pump water out of the ground and hope it's going to be okay. I had last January, a year ago January, right before the pandemic, I was in Chile, and Conchitoro has a research and innovation center down in Maule, which is kind of like Umpqua. And they have university students from all over the world that come and do a lot of work on a variety of different topics when it comes to sort of viticulture, enology, production, and they're not looking at like, how do we make wine cheaper and like it's like, okay, how do we look and examine the clones of Cabernet to see which is going to be most resistant for drought conditions? How do we look at the clones of Cabernet and slice and dice that to see which vines are going to thrive better in a more saline-rich soil because we pumped all the groundwater out and we're left with salt? How do we continue to innovate and adapt and do research in this industry that helps us continue to grow for the next 50 years, 100 years? So we don't just tap it out and be like, well, I guess we just got to uproot everything and go north. Because that just has ramifications across, I don't even know where to start. So my hope is that we're able to tell those stories, because I don't think it ever trickles down that far. We're able to have that in-depth of a conversation when we sell a bottle of Fetzer. People might look at it and be like, oh, cool, Fetzer, B Corp. They're using less water. That's awesome. And then they forget about it. And they take their Gerstemeter and they're happy. Well, if we can get down in front of the right people, because a lot of the storytellers and a lot of the advocates and the sort of, what's the word? Voices in the industry that are able to sort of penetrate furthest into people's minds. They aren't really interested in having a conversation about Fetzer. Or Bonterra for that matter, because they're like, okay, cool, you're doing that, I respect that, that's great. I need to talk about something more interesting. I need to talk about something that has a greater depth to it. I think we have that. We just haven't been able to tell that story because we don't have the wines that act as the sort of catalyst and conveyor of that story. So my hope is that we are able to continue to have the support to tell that story, to tell a better story about biodynamic viticulture and what that means and does and how that all coalesces. And about the small projects that might focus on a single, a project vineyard that's focused on this clone of Cabernet that is more drought resistant, because it's at that point it's not really about the wine, it's about what the wine is saying about where our priorities are. And that, I think, is what we have the opportunity to do, because we have the capital compared to small wineries. And that, to me, that's a force for good. That's a force that is really living into that B Corp ethos. Like, it's not all about profit margins. But you have to win over the people sometimes with that because we live in America, unfortunately, and that seems to just resonate the most. So if you can do both, or at least convince them with that and say, okay, great, this is the story I'm going to tell then. That's what I hope for.
And with Multnomah Wine Studio, obviously you mentioned kind of a pandemic project, which is an interesting reaction to a pandemic to start a business. But I'm curious about, you mentioned kind of the mission and the goal. Tell me about how market and growth and sort of like how you kind of foresee it going for you. How are you letting people know about it, and how far out does your kind of vision extend for it?
I think I've realized now that it isn't going to be kind of a flash in the pan sort of, I'm out. I do want to keep it going, and I do see a value in being able to. The pandemic has taught us that. I should say this. The pandemic has taught the generation over 50 that you can live and exist in a digital world with no major ramifications. Now, not to say that the pandemic didn't have ramifications, but that you don't have to go into the office to do your job. You can do it remotely. You don't have to go and physically taste somebody on a bottle of wine or to tell a story. You can do it digitally. And I think this has just amplified what already existed because we were forced to. So my hope is that I'm able to be more consistent. In the beginning, it's a side project, so it's like it's there. It's always in the back of your mind, and you're thinking like, I gotta get to that. But I need to make it a more regular occurrence. Like, okay, every 4 weeks this is coming out, but that takes dedicating time to it. And I've probably done 8 offerings, and I want to keep it going. I want to get it in a consistent rhythm where people know what to expect. And my mailing list is about 100 people. It's not large by any means, but I eventually would like to take that and sort of lean it into a more regular occurrence. Like, I have a regular occurrence, I have regular orders, I expand and be able to ship to other states and not totally rely on the Newburgh mailroom for all my shipping needs outside of Oregon. And but I eventually would like to get a little space that allows me to not have a retail wine shop with a bunch of inventory, but just a very select, like, hey, this is our mailing list, this is what we do. We do a little bit of classes here. We do you can come in, you can taste what's on our current pack, sign up, taste it, go explore. Like, I remember we were in Portugal, and there's this cherry liqueur that they make called ginginha, and which I'd never had before. It's super delicious. And the store that sold it was tiny. I mean, it was like 10 by 10. And I was like, well, that's awesome. Like, I don't need a giant retail space to be able to sell wines in retail because it's all done online. Like, but I need a space to help tell people about what I'm doing. If I could do that on the the Multnomah Village Strip, that would be my ideal. That's kind of a pipe dream. I have no idea. I don't know. I know what space I want, but there's somebody there. But that's okay. But I also think about, like, okay, well, the other wine store in town, like, they've been going 17 years. Like, how much longer are they going to be there? And I want to be ready when they close. I don't want to force them out of business by any means, but, like, I want to be ready when that opportunity arises, to be like, okay, I can jump on that. And I've always liked kind of, I don't really. A friend of mine owns a detail business, and he's like, oh, he's an entrepreneur. He's like, you're an entrepreneur. I'm like, I don't really feel like one because I'm not really. I don't like using that term for myself because it doesn't. I still have a full-time job. Like, this is a side project. I'd like to evolve it into something where I'm more entrepreneurial, where I'm able to kind of invest in it more, and it becomes something that I can eventually say, I'm going to do this full-time, or I'm able to sort of take this and leverage it with consulting or even just live digital tastings or other things like that. Like, when I was a kid, I grew up in a nursery, and my parents let me grow gourds, and I would take those gourds and I would sell them at my elementary school, and they would put, it was like 25 cents for like 4 gourds, or like $1 for 4 gourds, and I would take those and I'd buy Legos with them. And I've always had this desire to just cultivate something in my own view, instead of kind of having to do it for someone else. Even if it's with all the best intentions that company is doing XYZ, because, I just, that's a passion, and this is kind of a step in that direction, to just kind of take this and make it my own, and take something that I've been passionate about for the last decade and worked in for the last decade, and say, okay, I can do this too. I can tell my own story, and I can show people wines from all over, and I know it's nothing unique. Like, this is not a unique idea by any means, nor is the way I'm approaching it like completely unlike anything else anybody's ever done. There are other businesses like this, but they're not mine, and I get to do this with my own voice, and build it into something that I don't know what it looks like. I don't have that, like, this is exactly what I want. This is what I want to work toward. But I want to grow it, and I want to build it into something that allows me to just tell more of the stories that I do feel really passionate about. I think about, there's one wine I had in my pack called Beyond Organic, and it was a biodynamic producer out of Spain, and I cannot remember the name of the winery off the top of my head. I remember the label. And I feel like that happens a lot. It's like, I know what the label looks like, but I can't remember what it says. It was a sparkling, and they are a family who's owned this 350 acres for 17 generations. That's remarkable. They're in Spain, and I think in Mencia. And it's like, I've never heard of this wine. I've never come across it. I'm sure, people obviously sell it here, but like, I haven't seen this on a restaurant list. Like, I want to tell their story. I want, it's personal too. Like, I get to look into it, learn more, educate myself, and then pass it along. And maybe I only tell 100 people. Maybe only 6 of those read it, but it's a start.
So, kind of a 2-part question for you. We're going to kind of broaden out a little bit here. Biggest changes you've seen in the Oregon wine industry as a sort of a part of it / consumer / observer, and with us coming out of the pandemic, hopefully soon, what you see for the future of the industry? Just the biggest changes to now, and what comes next?
I think the biggest change, I kind of talked about it earlier, but is outside money coming into the state from everywhere, and the people in the Oregon wine industry are very intensely passionate about the Oregon wine industry, that's an understatement. And I think the biggest change is just how that outside money might begin to alter the narrative that has been crafted over the last 60 years. And what does that look like? And it's not that change is bad by any means, but it's just, money can have a very corrupting influence, and I just hope it doesn't. I hope that we don't see 99 through Dundee become a new Napa. I know some people want that because they're like, hey, I'm in it for the real estate. And I get that, but there is how do I say this? I fall victim to this, and I think we all do. There is a beauty in the naive, or excuse me, there is a beauty in the small, but that's kind of naive, But I think we fall for that because it's romantic, it's idyllic, but that's not really the way the world works, unfortunately. And I just hope that it's like, I don't want to see like Amazon move in here. It's like, oh, Jeff Bezos has another pet project. Like, I'm just whatever, a $30 million winery, cool. I bought Whole Foods, or people like that just because they can. Mm-hmm. I think that disturbs the ability for many of the people here to build businesses and to build their own histories and their own stories if they're having to fight against money that they just, it's like, okay, do I take it a loan? I'm under the thumb of the bank because I want to build a winery, or, am I stuck trying to battle the multimillionaires of the world for confined space? And that's only going to get harder and harder and harder and harder, and the people with money are going to win out because they have it. And I worry about that. I think that's the biggest change that I'm seeing, and I worry about where it's going to go and how it's going to evolve. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the solutions are. I really don't. That is not my area of expertise. But I hope it doesn't become too divisive. Mm-hmm. in an already very hotly divisive world. This is something we're all passionate about. Let's not fight over it too intensely, or lament too intensely the sort of change that is happening, that is inevitable, because change is. Mm-hmm. That being said, for being small, and many of the wineries here are small and work on, with a very dedicated, passionate group of people to see everything through day to day, and they're not bankrolled by big outside money, whoever it may be, whether it's the Evansteds or Barbara Banke or Boulanger family or whoever it may be. They were incredibly nimble and adaptive during this pandemic to say, hey, we can make all this happen, and we can keep our business rolling and keep our people employed and roll with it. Mm-hmm. I know this isn't Oregon, but I was just, Heights Vineyard, it came to my knowledge that they didn't let anybody off. Mm-hmm. But then again, this is the catch-22 of that. I'm like, oh, that's really admirable. They didn't let anybody go during the pandemic. Oh, wait a second, they're owned by a billionaire. I hope it doesn't come to that where only the places that are bankrolled by those people are able to sort of continue to support what they're doing, which is something we're all passionate about. But it was really a testament to the ability for wineries that aren't bankrolled by multimillionaires to stay alive, be nimble, be innovative, which the wine industry sorely needed, and their ability to take it online and say, I'm going to adapt to this and I'm going to thrive. And I've seen that all over. I mean, from you name the vineyards, but it's been really a breath of. It has been encouraging to see that, for the most part, nobody fell. I haven't seen any wineries go out of business that I'm aware. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Like, please let me know. But I don't know of any that have gone out of business, which is very encouraging. Mm-hmm. Because this was a major impact on the industry that our wineries here rely on, the hospitality and restaurant industry, everywhere, as well as just their ability to continue to produce wine in a very challenging environment, to say the very least.
So in addition to your work, Fetzer, your work at Multnomah Wine Studio, anything else in the future you're looking forward to? What comes next for you? What's your future look like?
I'm having a baby in August.
Well, congratulations.
So, well, I'm not. My wife is, but
slightly less big news.
Slightly less big news, but we're having a baby in August. So that's I don't even know. It's thrilling and exciting and scary and just a whole new adventure all in one. And I think the thing that is really encouraging me to it is getting into wine is kind of a black hole. The world of babies that is like a supernova. That is like the worst black hole ever. And I'm really excited that I really hope that we don't kind of fall victim to all the way it should be done and like, oh, don't do this, don't, because everybody has an opinion. And it's like, no, I think we're just going to try to do our own thing. And it's like, you know, I think about when it comes to travel and like taking your baby places, like, let's go camping. Like, I remember my parents took me camping at like 10 months old, like bathed me in a like nursery pot that had like a garbage sack. And nowadays people are like, oh, wow, that's terrible. But it's like, hey, you work with what you got. And I was fine. I mean, it worked out. But, you know, I'm really excited for that. I'm really excited for that change and that growth and that challenge that comes with that. And I'm an only child, you know, and I've never really been around small kids and babies, so it's like, it's frightening, but it's a friend of mine who had his like a 5-year-old son. He's like, I'll put it this way: you're awake for like 30 hours, and you're just like, and then you pass out. And then you wake up and like your dad like instincts have kicked on, and that like the time that you passed out, and you're like, I know what to do now. And I was like, I really hope it's that simple. I really hope that's what happens. But that's happening.
Been traveling a lot.
Yes. I don't want to do that as much. Like, I'm really happy to be home in Oregon. You know, over the last 10 years, I've gone to Chile like 30 times. Argentina, a dozen or so, all over the country. And I've been incredibly privileged and fortunate to be able to do that. And it's provided me a bevy of experiences that I'm lucky to have had. And they have, you know, been able to fill me with a variety of stories and knowledge and a whole host of things. But I'm really excited to be kind of just, and the pandemic has really kind of exacerbated it. Like, I didn't get tired of being at home. I kind of enjoyed it. I was like, I kind of like working from home, which was a big change from where I was in 2014, you know, 7 years ago, when I was like, oh, I can't stand this. Like, it's driving me crazy. How do I make all this work? And I hope that allows me to just kind of redouble my efforts and focus more on Multnomah Wine Studio, grow that, and see where it takes me. You know, continue this project with Fetzer and hope that has legs, or rather get those legs to run, because it has legs. They need to go somewhere. And then, you know, my wife and I like to travel, you know, and but we're not the type that wants to go. We just want to go somewhere and be gentle. You know, and if we can get out and travel with a baby and go places and, you know, go to these wine regions, like I keep thinking about the Okanagan in Canada, which is an endlessly fascinating area. But like, you can go up there and camp and like take a baby, and that's very exciting. And like, to be able to share with our daughter our passion for travel, for experience, for getting outside of our box, but also for the land, for geology, for plants, for agriculture, growing things. Like, that is a very exciting potential and future. Next year, so like, my dad is a German teacher. You know, my great-grandparents were German. They moved here from, you know, Kiel in northern Germany in 1880. And my dad is, you know, there are not a lot of German language programs around, but my dad got his degree in German language and literature. He's a German teacher. But I've never had and I've heard about it my whole life, but I've never had the opportunity to go to Germany with him, ever. And I'm thinking like, okay, I'm having a kid, I'm getting older, I'm an only child, my parents are getting older, my dad's getting older. We're gonna try to go to Germany next year and like take our daughter, and like, that is very, very, very exciting. And just go park it in the Mosel. And I'm like, cool. I get to experience this with my dad. That's a lifelong sort of excitement. And there's Riesling, like that is, and I get to, my daughter, my wife get to get, like I'm super excited about that. But then again, it goes back to that experiential, hands-on, touch, feel sort of way of learning that I like. And that resonates with me. And I think that all comes back to having a background in theater. Like, you can't just read a book in theater and be like, I get it now. You have to do and touch and be vulnerable and be willing to put yourself out there and not know what the outcome is going to be. And, put yourself in somebody else's hands for a while and see what happens and trust that. And that has certainly, I'm excited to do that again because we've certainly moved away from that because of the pandemic, which I get, but I'm looking forward to all that.
All right. That's all the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Covered a lot.
We did. Thank you. All I would say is, like, I don't know, break out of the, be willing to be vulnerable. Embrace that. And I mean, that goes with drinking wines too. Like, there is more out there than Pinot Noir. I love Pinot Noir. I love it, but like, there's more out there than Pinot Noir and California Cab, or Chardonnay, or Oregon Pinot Gris. Like, there's a resurgence of Chardonnay here. Cool. There are other things going on. Go explore Southern Oregon. Go explore the Umpqua. Go explore the Rogue, Elkton. Go explore Chile. And one of my favorite things that I like to do is I brown bag Chilean wines and I taste them next to, a Chardonnay or a Pinot, because nobody thinks those wines should come from there because Cabernet only. And I like trying to move people beyond their biases with wine. And, if Multnomah Wine Studio can do that, if I can do that with Fetzer, if this project, the Oregon Wine Archive, can, with the plethora of absolute legends and just incredible people that you've interviewed, and I'm very humbled that I get to be part of this, are doing, just, continue to, I just, for the people that watch us, drink outside of the box, just don't fall victim to just what marketing and corporate entities say you should drink. There are a lot of, the multimillionaires don't need more money, and the multi-million-dollar wine industry and some of the folks that control it don't need more money. Like, there are other people doing really interesting projects. Go drink their wine.
Like it. Thank you so much for
Thank
your time
you, Rich.
today, for your stories.
My pleasure.
For joining us, and we'll go and let you off the hook.
My pleasure, absolutely. Thank you both.